Hi class, welcome back to Research Methods. For this video, we are going to look over some highlights of Chapter 4 on psychological measurement, looking at how we approach psychological measurement, the strategies we use, and also how we assess the quality of our measurement. So a quick overview. Psychometrics, or the measurement of psychological constructs or phenomena. At its most basic level, it's the measurement task of assigning scores or numbers to represent a characteristic of an individual. And as researchers or consumers of research, we want high quality measurements, right? In other words, if a study says that it measured and found interesting relationships with depression, then we're going to expect that study had actually measured depression and did it well and accurately. But here's the tricky part. Humans and human behavior, human thinking, all of these, they're not based on some mechanical system with dials and measurement indicators sticking out of it, right? Typically, psychological measurements and constructs themselves cannot be directly measured. And why is that? It's because we're interested in people's tendencies towards their thoughts, feelings, and our actions. And there's many different types of assessments used to determine what might be influencing someone's thoughts or actions. For example, or I have a couple of examples here. This one in the top is an example from the thematic apperception test. And it's used sometimes by therapists to determine a client's thoughts and feelings by having them describe what is going on in the picture. Something like tell a story about what you see here. And the Rorschach ink blot test is also one used by therapists, and it provides an abstract picture for the client to describe what they perceive, and it could be anything. And there's some criticisms for these two measurements of a client's thoughts and feelings because of the inconsistency in how the test is administered, or the lack of consensus on how the test should be scored, or the lack of support for tests of reliability and validity for these. In other words, psychologists do not simply assume that their measures work. Instead, they collect data to demonstrate that they work. They evaluate the quality of their measurements by the way of reliability and validity. And what do we mean by reliability and validity? Well, reliability, think of the word consistency. It's the consistency across time or across items or across researchers or raters. And it's saying, is this measurement consistent? Looking at these in turn, we would say a retest reliability, that would be looking at something that might be more stable, like a personality trait like extroversion. I'm expecting that's going to be stable over, say, a month. How extroverted a participant is on day 1 of a month is likely similar to how extroverted they are at the end of the month. So that retest should be consistent with each other, right? They should be about the same, if not exactly the same. Internal consistency is looking at a different type of consistency. It would be like if I had a multi-item survey, all of these items trying to assess someone's extroversion, right? So 5 questions, and they're all about different ways someone might express their extroversion. I would expect all of these items to hang together, to be consistent with each other. And that would be talking about the internal consistency of that measure that has multiple items. And then the third one they have here, inter-rater reliability, is consistency across different raters. This would be an example if I had a student meet different professors, and then I asked each professor to rate how extroverted the student was. And then I would expect the raters to be similar to each other if they were all looking at the same student, right? The other way we look at the quality of a measure is through validity. And validity is the extent to which the scores from that measurement represent the construct that it's supposed to. Does it measure what it intends to measure? And the different types of validity that we talk about are face, content, criterion, and construct. Face validity is the easiest one. The way you can remember it is on the face of it, or just looking at it, does it seem to be what this says it is? If I said I was giving you a test for your skills for a job as a cashier, you would expect the test to have things like adding and subtracting money, right? That would be on the face of it, it looks like it would be something a cashier assessment would be asking, right? Face validity. You would not expect a question on there like, what's your favorite type of pet? That doesn't seem to be related to a cashier position, right? Unless it was like at a pet store or something. So face validity, you think of on the face of it, does this measurement seem to measure the things that we would expect it to? And the remaining validity types, content validity, criterion related validity, and construct validity, those are easier to talk about as we have a contextual example to work with. So let's look at that on the next slide. So validity, I want you to think of the word accuracy or truth. If you're looking at the validity of a measure, you're saying, is it accurate or does it truly represent what I'm saying it does, right? So let's say our example here that I have a measure that's purporting to measure someone's confidence in research method skills. And in that's the construct right there that we're trying to get at, someone's confidence in their skill set. The type of validity that would be content, right, this one, is saying that all of these areas make up the confidence in research method skills construct that we're trying to measure. Like if I only asked students about how confident they are in testing hypotheses, that would not be enough information to really know if they're confident in research method skills across the board, right? So content validity is saying, is all of the content of this area represented? For construct validity, if we took just one piece of this, like reading research, we would say, hey, does this tag into reading research, that area that's being assessed right there? And two ways we look at, does the measure accurately measure reading research, would be through convergent and discriminant validity tests. Convergent means, is it the same? Does it converge with other things that it should be related to? Like reading research, I would expect that to be related to reading skills, right? If someone reads well, I'm expecting them to also read research well. So I would expect those two to converge and be highly related. Whereas discriminant validity is that it should be different from something that it should be different to. So let's say reading research and let's see, how about algebra skills? I would not necessarily expect that reading research skills would be highly related or highly similar to algebra skills. So I could give participants an algebra skills and a reading research skills assessment, and I would expect those two scores to not be very related, highly related. And that's part of construct validity. And then the last one here, criterion related validity. Criterion is usually your outcome. If I'm purporting that a student's confidence in research method skills should be related to them feeling prepared to design their own study, then we can measure that. We can look at their score on the confidence in research method skills survey, and we could also ask them how confident they feel in designing their own study. And if those two are highly related, we're saying that this survey, this measurement, has shown criterion-related validity. Now, there's a couple different ways that we can assess criterion-related validity, and they're called concurrent or predictive. Concurrent is when we measure these at the same time. If I measured students' confidence in research method skills and measured how prepared they feel for designing their own study, and then I saw if it's related or not, then that would be a concurrent criterion-related validity test. Whereas if I assessed someone's confidence in research method skills at the beginning of the term, and then towards the end of the term asked them how prepared they are to design their own study, that would be predictive. That I'm predicting that their confidence level at time A, time 1, is related to a time 2 later down the line in their feeling prepared to design their own study. That's predictive when it's separated by time. So that's a rundown on validity. I know that's a lot. Definitely put any questions you have in the Q&A board so that we can kind of nail those down. So these 4 steps that they introduce us to in your chapter for strategic measurement of psychological constructs, they include conceptually defining the construct, operationally defining the construct, and then implementing the measure and evaluating the measure. Now that first one, the conceptual definition, it describes that behavior or the internal processes that describe the phenomena itself. Like, for example, if we were interested in one's tendency to fear public speaking, we would first start with what is that? What is a fear of public speaking? We would define the construct and how is it manifested within a person. We could look at maybe arousal, like if someone's aroused because of all the people in the room and they feel intimidated by having to speak in front of people, that ups their arousal, and this is how we define the construct conceptually of this fear when speaking in front of other people. And then we get to operationally defining the construct. Exactly how would we measure this? Would we use like a self-report, like a survey or an interview or a focus group, and ask the participant, hey, tell me about a time where you were afraid of public speaking and let me know what was going on. What do you think was driving that fear? Things like that. Or we could watch, we could observe the behaviors of a participant going up to do a public speaking event and just take notes and seeing if we can observe what's going on with a fear of public speaking. Or we could even take physiological measurements, maybe things like heart rate or blood pressure, things that might be indicators of stress. So there's different ways that this could be measured, and you have to decide on that before being able to implement the measure, right? But even once you've decided it, implementing the measure can be tricky as well. Depending on how the construct is going to be measured, but also depending on if the participant changes their behavior due to the testing environment, due to the experiment. So if a participant wants to cooperate too much with a researcher, they might change their behavior because they're trying to help. Or a participant might try to guess, oh, I think this is what their research question is, and again, trying to help out the researcher, and they change their behavior, which totally messes up the study because you were trying to find out what they do normally, not just what they do when they think someone's watching, right? So implementation of the measure can get tricky as well. And then finally, evaluating the measure. And this goes back to what we just were talking about with, is it reliable? In other words, consistent? And is it valid? Is it really measuring what we thought it was going to measure? So one thing I want you to think about on this is what could go wrong if someone skipped any one of these steps? Like, what if we don't operationally define the construct? What might be the effect on the study? And when you're thinking this through, like just pick one of them and say, what would happen if we didn't implement correctly, or we didn't conceptually define the construct correctly? And how would it impact the study? Specifically, how would it impact the reliability and the validity of that study? So think on that before you get to the mod exam. And speaking of that, definitely look over your concepts in Chapter 4 and post any additional questions you have in the chapter Q&A discussion board. Take your chapter quiz to get familiar with some of the items that you would likely see on the mod exam. And as we're coming to the end of Module 1 at this point, you want to complete the mod exam by the Sunday deadline at 5 p.m. Good luck with that, and I look forward to seeing you on the discussion boards.